What's going on, everyone? It's Justin here, and I've had the iPhone 14 Pro as my main phone, and it's time to give you my final review. So as a summary, we actually had this iPhone before it came out to public, and we actually brought it straight to Iceland to start capturing some photos and videos and putting that camera to the test before traveling off to Italy, Singapore, Austin, Germany, and Paris. So if there's one area that has really been put through its paces, it is the camera. And I feel like that is probably the most significant change to this year's iPhone, on top of the dynamic island that is on the front right here. Because otherwise, as someone who has had the latest iPhone for the past few years, I really haven't noticed any major differences to my daily operation. And that isn't really a bad thing at all. I've also got a ton of iPhone 14 cases at the moment, so if you would like to win one, just go ahead and subscribe to the channel, drop a like on this video, and leave a comment down below with the size of iPhone that you have. And also leave your Instagram username as well, because we'll be contacting you within the next month. So probably the biggest thing that you're gonna notice on the front here is the dynamic island. And it's Apple's way of sort of reinterpreting the notch. It doesn't really get rid of it entirely. And a lot of smartphones nowadays have different methods of trying to hide any physical presence of a front-facing camera by either experimenting with under-display technology, maybe having the camera on a bit of an island up here, or even having it pop out from the top, which we have seen in the past. I would say that the dynamic island is a really good approach. It enables there to be more space on each side of the screen, and there's also a functional element to it with compatible applications that allow it to display information, but also quick access at the top. The biggest concern that I had right off the bat was if you're going to be touching your phone around that front-facing camera, it's probably going to smudge it. And in the beginning, I will admit, it was really hard to kind of remember that new functionality. And for the first few weeks, I really didn't use Dynamic Island at all. But I do feel like with being able to change the music, go to the music app, and also using apps such as ride sharing, where it gives you an estimated time, it at least utilizes this certain area that has to be there for the Face ID and stuff relatively effectively. One thing that is a bit of a drawback though is that when you go ahead and watch a movie, it theoretically takes up more space on the screen than the original notch. It hasn't really affected the viewing experience, but it is definitely something that I have noticed. So I'd say all in all, Dynamic Island is nice, but perhaps one of my favorite features is the fact that the display is even brighter. It is able to hit a peak brightness outside of 2000 nits in the daylight, and that is just good for any scenario where there's direct sunlight hitting your phone and you want to be able to still see what is on the screen. In terms of the next biggest feature though, it's got to be the camera. It features a 48 megapixel sensor for the first time, and Apple has really stuck to that 12 megapixel resolution for quite a while now. But as a result of the 48 megapixel sensor, it allows you to take photos in 48 megapixel RAW, but the typical export size is still in 12 megapixels, and it also allows you to have a 2x photo mode because it utilizes a 12 megapixel portion of the sensor of that main camera. That has really been a game changer, because one of the focal lengths I definitely missed was the 2x camera, because I feel like the 3x in terms of quality is definitely the worst out of all of the cameras. From a day-to-day usage, you're not really going to notice the biggest difference when it comes to the photo performance. In the well-lit situation, the camera on the previous generation iPhone was already really good, and the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus actually uses the same hardware as last year, but it has some optimizations that improve that low light performance. As a result of the new camera sensor on this main iPhone, it not only gives you a physical advantage, but it also uses image signal processing to be able to give you a better low light performance by 2x. And that is an area that I definitely did notice, especially when it comes to video, where every little bit of low light performance helps on a smartphone. So it's nice to be back in New York, because I feel like it's a perfect place to test out the 48 megapixel camera, but also specifically the 48 megapixel RAW. We're going to one of our favorite places to check out every time we're in town, and that is Summit One Vanderbilt. And they've given us great access before it is open to public to be able to go up there and take some beautiful photos as the day starts in this crazy city. So beyond New York, as I mentioned, this camera has been around the world. Literally since we got the iPhone 14 Pro, we had been traveling every single week, and you can see some of the photos here, unedited and edited, which I've marked on screen, brought some impressive results. The biggest tip I can give to like the average consumer when it comes to taking smartphone photos is set your exposure. Tap on what you're focusing on, make sure your lens is clean, and the phone does the rest of the work. When it comes to low light images, there has been some improvement here, both thanks to the hardware and the image signal processor, and I think the most impressive example here is in Iceland with the northern lights. I take most of the photos in the standard 12 megapixels, but I do occasionally switch to 48 megapixels if it's a photo that I think I'm going to edit and post on Instagram. When I took a look at a raw sample in Lightroom, I just got to see how much latitude there was in this camera, and specifically how there wasn't any of that like sharpening and noise reduction that you usually see when the smartphone processes the photo by itself. It actually had like a very nice look to it, and just the amount of data that you're able to pull in the highlights and the shadows was very impressive. One thing to keep in mind though is that the file size is almost 90 megabytes if you take a 48 megapixel raw photo. You do also have the option to have it save in a 12 megapixel raw photo, so if you don't have like a ton of storage, then you definitely want to keep that in mind. So just be a little bit selective in terms of which photos you take in the full resolution raw. The video capabilities though were also really good. Even without the action mode in 4K, the stabilization was impressive, but at the same time when it came to like slightly darker scenarios, this is where the advantage definitely shows on the new Pro model of iPhone. And because we record all of our Reels and Instagram stories on the iPhone 14 Pro, I actually got a lot of questions of what we specifically shot that on, and even though it isn't like a night and day difference from last year's iPhone, I think if you're coming from like the iPhone 12, for example, it is definitely a pretty big jump. And so if you record a ton of videos on your smartphone, then I would say that this year's iPhone delivers very, very good video. And on top of that, the new modes such as action mode does a very good job, but it is shoot in a 2.8K resolution as opposed to 4K. The action mode is an interesting one because even without action mode, the stabilization in a lot of scenarios was already really good. But if you're like running along like a rough terrain, for example, action mode is one where in a well-lit situation, it can utilize the ultra-wide camera and even with the crop in, deliver great image quality. But as soon as it gets even a little bit dark, even during the daytime, the action mode definitely shows a ton of noise. So that is just something to be mindful of. Before we move on though, I want to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of this video, Clean My Mac. And this is a program that you should absolutely install on your computer the second that you get it, because I've pretty much had it on every single MacBook that I've had to date. When you're running all the daily tasks on your computer, whether it's email, having these large attachments, Chrome, and also all the general tasks, your computer does have a lot of built-up files that can not only take up a lot of space, but also cause your computer to slow down. And what I love about Clean My Mac is that it is just such a beautiful interface, but it is able to run a general maintenance scan on your computer, and with one click, it will clean up all the files that do take up a lot of space. Another really great feature is the menu app. With the dashboard, it gives you informative monitors of every aspect of your Mac's performance and allows you to monitor and also adjust certain settings while also following some of the recommendations. There's also the malware removal tool that scans your MacBook for viruses, adware, browser hijackers, and other macOS specific threats. And another very useful feature is Space Lens, which lets you visualize your entire disk to see if there's any large or unneeded files taking up unnecessary space. I've been a paid customer of Clean My Mac for many years now, so if you guys want to go ahead and check it out for yourself, they're running a 30% off discount for a limited time only, so check that link in the description that is also on screen. So now that we've spent a ton of time on the camera and how it benefits from a lot of the image signal processing power, let's go ahead and talk about the actual software experience and usability performance-wise in the past 6 weeks. So this iPhone 14 Pro features the A16 Bionic chip, and it's one where I would say even in previous generations, there's already been more than enough power in the iPhone despite what the specs would say compared to like say an Android phone on the market. And I really didn't feel like there had to be many performance improvements because whatever tasks that I would do on the smartphone itself, it was able to handle very quickly. It was more so down to like the image signal processing elements that are able to utilize that additional power to compute in a much faster way and also enable features such as action mode, which uses that combination of hardware and software along with the improvements of low light performance. It's a 6-core CPU with 2 performance and 4 efficiency cores paired with a 5-core GPU and a 16-core neural engine. And when it comes to actually using it day to day, I haven't really noticed a big difference in terms of speed from the iPhone 12 to the iPhone 13. So all I've got to say about the processing is that from a day-to-day and non-technical perspective, it has been able to handle all the tasks that I need at a relatively prosumer level without any hiccups whatsoever. So the emergency SOS feature will be really interesting to see whether satellite technology gets adopted beyond just for emergency services, for sending and receiving text, for example, because there are still many scenarios where you may not have signal or reception and still like to communicate. So while we were in New York, we also got a live demonstration and test of the SOS mode on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. After you have triggered the option, it will ask you a set of questions that are efficient and allow you to relay the information needed across to get help as soon as possible. It asks you about the emergency, who needs help, as well as any vital signs before asking you to connect to the satellite. And the trick to this is to utilize the tool to point it at the direction where it's able to get the best signal possible. And in a lot of cases, that is where there is limited foliage and direct view line to the sky. As you can see here, the guiding tools are really great, and we were able to get connection very quickly, and from there it will start to process the message to one of Apple's relay centers, who will then contact local emergency services based on the information you provided. From there, you can describe your specific location key points as well as any additional information, and if you have emergency contacts added, it will also notify them as well. This is a really cool demonstration to check out, and it's just another one of Apple's initiatives to push health and safety into technology. The location sent via satellite also works with Find My Friends, for example. You can also use a demo of SOS mode in the settings of your iPhone 14 or 14 Pro to get more familiar with the interface and the process in the case of an emergency. So the next thing is about battery life, and this is probably the only category that I would say I notice a slight drawback compared to the previous generation. Even though the all-day battery life theoretically is supposed to last the exact same time as before, I will say I used to drain my iPhone within about a day, no problem. Like by about 7 p.m. I will need to plug it into a charger, and throughout the year that was sort of one of the trade-offs that I realized of dropping down to the iPhone 13 Pro as opposed to going with the 13 Pro Max. And this year I decided to go with the iPhone 14 Pro instead of the 14 Pro Max just because it's a lot more manageable, and I have found that the battery life is maybe about 1 to 2 hours less than what I was getting on the previous generation iPhone. It has definitely improved in the time that Apple has issued a few different updates, and that is totally normal, but I did also turn off the always on display, and I've been getting closer to maybe 45 minutes to an hour of the battery life that I was getting on my previous iPhone, but still not quite as much. So I think that is one category where I hope to see a pretty big improvement in the future, because if someone spends in my case, it's almost 8, 9.5 hours of general usage on the device, then you're gonna have to charge it more than once a day. Based on usage of the iPhone 14 Pro Max, so the battery life has been excellent on that. So if that is an issue and you don't want to carry around like a backup battery, the MagSafe backpack, or have to charge it very often, then that is going to be the solution to that. So as someone who has tried different iPhones throughout the years and have also compared them, this is my kind of takeaway from the iPhone 14 Pro. It is able to deliver in each of the categories that Apple has tried to improve, but in some areas not as complete as others. For example, the camera. The main camera is really good. It's been upgraded. The features are definitely very useful for someone who takes a lot of photos, and that alone for me is a reason to upgrade, just because I take thousands of photos and videos on my smartphone every single year. And the dynamic, frankly, is one that is an improvement from before, but obviously not a reason to upgrade. The battery life is not an improvement, and generally speaking, if you're coming from the iPhone 12 to the iPhone 14, you're gonna be very impressed and be able to enjoy a lot of these great features. But if you're from last year's iPhone, I don't really think there's a huge reason to upgrade unless you really, really want that camera improvement. I think the two biggest features that I would really like to see on the wish list for next year is the optical periscope camera, as well as maybe some more improvements in the ultra-wide as well, 4K action mode, maybe the ability to record 8K video on the primary camera, because the sensor is theoretically capable of that. So just having the choice to do so would be nice in specific scenarios, even if it was like downsampled 6K, or just having the option to record in a slightly higher resolution than 4K. And of course, also better battery life. This is something that I feel like is always one of those things where smartphones are getting faster at their charging methods. There's more ways to charge them as well, but the core battery technology hasn't really changed in many years now. And so whether or not Apple decides to implement like a dual cell technology for ultra fast charging or even reverse wireless charging options, which I feel like is useful for AirPods occasionally or charging another phone, these are just some little features that I've noticed. But coming from the iPhone 13 Pro, the main features are definitely ones that I've appreciated, but I just don't think it is the biggest upgrade year there is. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you go ahead and drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below as to what you think, and I'll see you all in the next video.